Morning, morning, monsters. Good to see you all. Oh dear, is the camera as dark as it seems? You see, this is what I said when I didn't even check the camera. I realized because I had blaring fun times the other day. I am darkness, hear me roar. It'll be fine, don't worry. Camera control. Exposure, auto. There we go. Let there be light. You can see again. Oh dear, and I didn't even realize the FedEx parcel in the background's visible and everything. It's fine. Oh, that is Ludum Dare energy. That is a weekend of code. Now remember, going into this, I said the most important thing was to learn and grow. And hey, it turns out I had a weekend of learning and growing, which is always fun. But it was a weekend of pain as well. It is fun though. So Ludum Dare or any of these compos now, I go in with a much more balanced approach because I'm a very busy person. I do tend to, throw myself wholly at the thing. But for instance, on Saturday morning, I could have skipped my normal skate in Battersea Park. I chose not to. I spent about 2 hours writing stuff up before I went to Battersea. And then I nipped to Battersea. I did my little skate. I got an ice cream. I came home and I continued on. So all good, fine and dandy. Works for that. Works for me. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm loving having colour again in my hair. It is good. So that all being said, immediately the theme when I saw it, by the way, before I headed off to the skate, was like getting wheels turning, because as I mentioned in my projects video, the two of the main things I'm working on at the moment are my Vulkan engine, which is for VR, exclusively for VR really, and a project called Dig Deep, which is a culmination of a whole bunch of other previous Ludum Dares, and it's a thing that I have been playing with for some time. So yeah, I really wanted to throw myself into those. And then when the theme was go deeper, I was like, everything I am thinking about is coming into the game I'm working on, right? So I was like, okay, what can I do? Now, unfortunately, I've been having some trouble with OpenXR. As I say, I've been just developing the engine. So I did decide not to make it a VR game initially. And I was like, okay, disable the OpenXR stuff. And that was like, the engine was not happy with that. But I kicked it a few times and made it go, okay, it's okay. And now the rest was, okay, so I have a concept, and I'm going to be honest, before I continue to work on Dig Deep, I am going to finish this concept, even if I don't finish it for Ludum, because it's such a simple concept that I just really want to play with it. Not VR. It's basically climbing down a cliff face, ragdoll character, and I want to play around with rope physics, batons, and mouse control, where you're like holding on to points and you've got to seek points, and it's all about like the four fingers controlling the grab and release, very similar to the Fireman rescue game I did back in the day, and also similar to the better actual game that was released after I did that, which was the climbing game by the Quap creator, whose name I'm totally blanking on right now. But I had a variation on that involving the mouse and kinetic energy with the mouse and the rope, and really I don't need much complexity to code it. So I was like, no, this is totally something I can do. So the first thing I sat down, I was like, okay, my FBX importer all kind of works in the engine. So I was like, okay, let me grab some rocks and make some quick rocks and get at least a sample rock in to get an idea of, this is a shitty asset, what's the poly count, get it in, figure out if it's all fine. It's all fine. It works great. The instancing works great. That's that's a dream. And then I was like, okay, well, shit, I don't have a physics engine. And I just didn't realize, because I've been so deep in a very specific part of the game project, because there's some core mechanics in that game project and that the engine needs the support, that I've been tinkering away on. And I was like, wait, I don't even have like basic intersection physics stuff. And I was like, well, right, well, I've got access aligned bounding boxes for rendering reasons, and I set them up, but I was hand defining bounds, and I was like, okay, well, let me get a thing that just builds those up from the mesh thing. And I was like, oh god, how does this, I had to remind myself how buffer views worked, and I was like, okay, right, yes, no, here's a buffer view, because for those of you who don't know, Vulkan is a huge improvement in graphics APIs, but it does work very different to all of the older graphics APIs. Like if you're coming from the older versions of DirectX, or if you're coming from OpenGL, you do have to kind of reset your mind a bit when dealing with Vulkan. And I've just not done graphics programming in a very long time, so yeah, that's why this engine has been taking me so long. But anyway, I was like, okay, get the verts. Deal with sparse accesses, because that's sometimes the case with GLTF stuff. And I was like, okay, all good. We can now go over this thing. We can get the access aligned bounding boxes. Fantastic. That was like the first hour of code that I just had to knock out. And then I was like, right, physics. Now, the correct solution, and the solution I might do at some point, is implement Bullet or a similar physics engine into my engine, because physics is hard. But for this particular game, I don't need very good physics, and a lot of the physics I do need is very bespoke and weird, and it turns out physics engines don't do bespoke and weird very well. So I was like, okay, I can solve this. And I've also been thinking a lot about physics engines because of Dream's physics engine, but also because of SDF and volumetric stuff in general. For those of you who don't know, Dream's physics engines, it's balls. It's balls all the way. It's basically, you take the volume, you inflate balls in it, and you try to make a body of balls to represent the thing, because it turns out sphere intersections are really fast. And you can do things like calculate angular, like moment of inertia and stuff relatively quickly. So balls are really good. So I'm rather attracted to the idea of just balls everywhere. There was a few other like BVH models, and then there was just simple like, what if we do ray surface intersections? Like, okay, cool. I don't need to make that decision yet. The next thing I need is I need to be able to render these access aligned bounding boxes. And here's where we hit a bit of a sticky wicket. Vulkan, as I say, not the strongest graphics programmer, still getting like up to speed with it all, getting my engine going. I needed an intermediate mode debug tool. Now, what does that mean? Well, intermediate mode means on demand you call functions like draw sphere, and you don't call them in one place, you call them all over the place. Or draw access aligned bounding box, because you call them whenever you want them. And then as you go through a frame, your intermediate mode thing gathers all these up, and at the end it compiles them all up and sends them off to the renderer, because the renderer does not like things happening come as they are. They like to have it all, especially Vulkan likes to have it all packaged up and sent off in the command buffer and everything. And so that's a bit of a tricky thing. But good news, I have an example in the GUI system I'm using, which is IMGUI, which is really good. So many people use IMGUI. It's fantastic. It's a funny story. IMGUI actually comes out of Tearaway. It was the guy at Omar, who was working on Tearaway at Media Molecule. There'd been some like concepts around intermediate mode GUIs and stuff. So mostly for debugging, and yeah, so that's where it all came out. And he now maintains that project full time, and everyone from like every game developer under the sun and graphics researcher to NASA uses IMGUI. It's great. IMGUI's got a lot of different graphics backends it's rendered into, but in my particular engine, I'm using Vulkan implementation, which means I've got an example of an intermediate mode renderer. And it's at this stage I start to get some bugs and errors. And now, this wasn't the best distraction, but I have this logger in my engine I rather like. It's very simple in that every single log line, when I have it turned on as a mode, will spit out the file and line number the log line's from. Extremely useful. But the way I had to write it was including the file and line macro, and I was like, there must be a better way. I know I've done a better way, or I've worked with an engine that did a better way. It's like, I can't think of it. And then I was like, wait a minute. And so now I'm totally distracted. I was like, wait a minute, what about STB headers and STB nothings? Now, for those of you who don't know, STB libraries from nothings is a header-only library that includes. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna pause just for a second. I'll be right back. I didn't go anywhere. What do you mean I went somewhere? Okay, it's all good. Right. So we were talking about intermediate mode GUIs, and we were talking about rendering and the Vulkan backend that existed, and I can use this as an example. And I'm like, fantastic. So I go dig into the Vulkan IMGUI backend thing, which I freely admit I yanked from somewhere. I think it's actually in the IMGUI thing itself, the implementation. And so now I'm going through and I'm like, all right, and the login's bugging me and the file and line thing's bugging me. So I'm looking at the STB nothings headers, and STB nothings header only C++ library or C library, really. Very, very useful, very, very nice. And I'm going and I'm like, okay, I know somewhere he has login in, and it's like, of course it's in the main header file. And I dig it out and I'm looking at this thing. And for those of you who don't know, the reason why it's a pain in the neck was because I was like, let me just use a macro. But the macro never evaluated the correct way, because it would just evaluate the line that the macro itself was on. So that's why I didn't use it in the past. Turns out if you nest a macro in a macro, that is the trick, right? So basically I had to nest a macro thing, and then I had to use a function to save the file online to static variable, and then I could use it in the login function. I was like, but this did mean I spent 4 hours rewriting my login library. 4 hours well spent. I am very happy with that time spent, but it wasn't the straight line critical path thinking I needed to get to where I was going. It's fine. We now have a really sweet login library, including, because the thing that was stopping me making some nice macros for like check and return and Vulkan validate and stuff, because all the time you're calling these functions where it's like, is it a success? If it's not a success, log an error code and shit the bed. And now I can make that like this nice little wrapper, and it compacts the code down very nicely. And it's something that I never realized the importance of code compactness until Evans kind of drilled it into my head, because I was bitching about the fact of like, why do we have a brace not on a new line so it doesn't line up nicely, and why do we not just space stuff up more nicely? And he's like, because the more space a thing takes up, the more space in your head it takes up. So we try to pack the stuff down, and then you can see more concepts, and you can see the patterns, you can see the interesting stuff, not the guff. And that's something that's kind of really appeals to me now. So having a macro that I can shove around something that's called VK valid and does all of this junk, and bonus points, if it fails, it's spitting out the exact file and line it failed, and I don't have to write a unique error message, because I don't have to worry about the same error message being written in two places. Fan-bloody-tastic. I love it. And it came to save my butt later, so that's all good. But now we're a solid, like, not a full day, we're a solid, like, half day into Ludum Dare at this point, and I've written an access align, I've written a game design, I've written an access align bounding box thing, and I've upgraded my login system. And I'm like, bollocks. Oh yes, and I went skating, which tubed up a bunch of time. Okay, so now I'm like, okay, I've really got to dig into this intermediate Go problem. So here's the fun thing that I actually really, really like about Vulkan, is it's got this concept called validation layers, which basically means you can slow down the graphics and include error checks at the library level to basically warn you you're doing something you shouldn't do, you might get away with it, but you shouldn't do it. So it's not a full-blown error, but it usually leads to full-blown errors. And the advantage of this is all of these Vulkan validation errors come with not only a really detailed error message, and I mean like a paragraph, but it comes with HTML link to a full-ass like thing that explains exactly what you need. And I'm like, hallelujah! Seriously, can more libraries not just have online documentation and have an error code that is a URL? It is the future. It is 100% the future. Just a permalink, a good solid permalink, And the difference between a URI and a permalink, by the way, in web design and like when I say web design, I mean like Tim Berners-Lee infrastructure level design. I don't mean like, oh, I'm fucking around with HTML and CSS. Oh god, that was really condescending to front-end developers. Front-end developers, I love you. You make really, really pretty things. But the difference is that a permalink is updated content. So like, for instance, if the content changes, the link stays the same, but there's new content there. Whereas a URI tends to be static content, that if the content changes, there's a new version of the link. So anyway, that's what it is. Yeah, those error codes, super, super handy. I would love to see more validation stuff like that. But I'm digging in, and I hit a whole sea of validation errors. And I don't mean sea this in language, I mean a whole ocean of shit. And I'm trying to dig through, and I'm trying to figure out Vulkan. And I'll be honest, that was my Sunday. I was like, the debug draw, it's gonna take maybe 3 hours. And then like, I knew that once the debug draw was up, even if I just mocked out all the gameplay using the debug draw, I could get most of the gameplay kind of there, because I knew everything I needed to code in my head after that. It was all not engine stuff, it was all just game stuff, and I had a series of stuff in my head, which is the main reason why I'm going to continue and finish this thing. before I go back to my main project. But yeah, bulk invalidation errors. I'm sitting in a mess of command pool and resource binding and dynamic viewport versus static viewport, and I'm just like, so that's probably going to be my week. That's probably going to be my week as I figure that out, as I work all that out. And do you know, through all of this segment, I'm really, really happy I did Ludum Dare. And I failed again. But did I really fail? I failed to submit a video game. I did not fail to learn. I did not fail to push my engine forward, to write good code that I'm going to continue to use. Like, this is the thing. In the past, I'd do these kind of things. I'd have these kind of weekends, really tons of code, and I'd walk away and I'd be all sad and disappointed. But I'm not sad and disappointed because I went in with this mindset. And it helps. It really, really does help. And frankly, it's not more maintainable for me these days. Yeah, that's good. Why am I writing my own engine? Why am I doing all this insanity? Well, I have been promising for years that I would do a video about the engine duopoly. Now that I'm out of the games industry, I should probably do that. Oh, it's a tough video to make because I am shitting the bed a little bit, peeing in the pool and all that. But I want to talk about it. I do want to talk about it because I was on a panel recently, and like we were prepping for the panel, and the question of the engine duopoly came up, and it was like, yeah, please don't go into that because they're one of our main sponsors, and that has come up in so many cases in game industry things that I'm just like, this needs to be talked about. This here needs to be talked about. Okay, with all of that in a ribbon, that is how I spent my Ludum Dare. I am going to continue to solve these Vulkan validation errors. You will see the Ludum Dare game that I sketched out come into reality before my main game because it's simple enough. It's simple enough that I think I should do it. Yeah. It's simple enough that I think I should do it. That being said, that's where I am. That's the hunky-dory doody. Yeah. That was Ludum Dare. And I hope you did it. I hope you had fun. I hope the next time a jam opportunity comes forward, you set your goals, you go for it, and you have a blast. But until then, bye-bye.